Welcome back to Questions for the Rector. I'm your host, Stephen Heiner, and with us, as always, is Rector of Most Holy Trinity Seminary in Reading, Pennsylvania, His Excellency Bishop Donald Sanborn. Hello, Your Excellency.
Hello, Stephen.
I've had a chance to get a sneak preview of your upcoming newsletter, and in it, you trace a line of logic from artificial birth control to abortion and other
And
evils
beyond.
and other evils.
Yes.
Can you start us on that philosophical train?
Yes. Even the deist Thomas Jefferson said that the Creator endowed men with inalienable rights, and one of them was the right to life. He says that in the Declaration of Independence. Now, he was a deist. A deist means somebody who says there is a God and he created the world, but now he has no care of it. You can do whatever you want. You're on your own. That's a deist. There's a fine line between deism and atheism, very fine line. But he said he was a deist, and that's very important that even he who could determine that and discern that the right to life comes from God, because for various reasons. Because man has an immortal soul. What the parents do in reproduction is they provide the matter to God for infusion of the immortal soul. That is totally different from how the animals reproduce, who produce their own souls. In other words, they reproduce their own souls. In other words, the animal has a life principle. A soul is simply a life principle, what moves the life in anything. It's a life principle, but the life principle in human beings comes from God, and that's why it is that we are created in the image and likeness of God, and we have an intellect and will. Now, it can be understood even by reason. In other words, that you cannot have a being that can know reality with his intellect and will the good freely simply by matter. There has to be an intervention of something higher than matter to have that effect. So we are not like animals. You see, we are actually more like angels than we are like animals in that sense. So that means that the creative process and the process of reproduction is principally under God's control and authorship and causality. Principally, the parents are merely instruments of it. They have a secondary causality, you might say, in it. And so human life is guaranteed as inalienable because precisely it comes from God. Now that has tremendous implications. It means that the whole process of reproduction must be in accordance with the natural law. So it starts with matrimony, believe it or not, because matrimony is ordered primarily to procreation and education of children. And even by natural law, matrimony is indissoluble. Not only the sacrament, but by natural law it is indissoluble because the offspring have a natural right to be born into a family that will be stable, will give them food, will give them moral training until they are able to go on their own.
That might not be entirely clear to people, Your Excellency. Why does that offspring have that right, as you call it?
Because it has that need. You see, cats will breed and they will keep their kittens for a few weeks, and then they feed them and they give them a little basic training, you might say, the mother cat, and then they're picked up after about 6 or 7 weeks, and they go to homes and they install themselves in homes very nicely.
As the new rulers.
Yes, and they are completely at home, so they only need a few weeks, you see. But even the father cat occasionally helps, you see. And so the whatever is needed, that is provided by nature, you see. So in some cases, birds, for example, stay together with their young. Whatever is needed. But the parents have an obligation to the young because of the obligation to reproduce. You see, so if you're reproducing, you have to give the means of the offspring to achieve their ends Otherwise, don't reproduce.
So because there's a need for it, we have a right to it.
Yes, absolutely. So you can't just put a baby out, we had a baby, so you put it outside, you see, or keep it for, a year or something and then let it go on its own as soon as it can walk. There has to be not only a physical education, but a moral education, which is far more important and far more lengthy. You see, so the child has a right to that. And so the parents, it's one of the reasons why marriage is indissoluble, the principal reason why it is indissoluble. All right, so that's number one. Number two is sexual intercourse. The whole purpose and of all the organs, etc., is conception. You see, and even the pleasure attached to it is in order to draw people to reproduction so that the human race does not go away. You see, so if it were not a pleasurable thing, people would just not engage in that. You see, so just like if food always tasted bad, you probably wouldn't eat it too much. You might starve to death. So you'd have to be desperate. You see, so in order to multiply the human race, that's why the pleasure is there. So, but its primary object is conception. So there again, God is involved in conception. See, so the natural law, even if you leave religion out of this, just God as author of nature is there in conception. He is contributing the immortal soul to the child. That conceived fetus, well, let's say, not even if somebody wanted to say, well, that's not a child yet, fetus has a right to arrive at birth. In other words, a right to be carried all the way to birth, because precisely the parents are only secondary causes in it, and it is God's work. St. Thomas Aquinas says, he who consents to the beginning consents to the end. And I'll give you an example. You get on a plane. The plane takes off. You are consenting to the destination of that plane by being on it voluntarily. And by voluntarily engaging in acts which are conducive to conception, you are consenting automatically to everything that conception involves, including bringing that fetus, if you want to call it, all the way to the birth of a child. So I'm responding to anybody that might say, well, it's not a human being until it's 15 weeks or something like that. It doesn't matter whether it is or not. It has by God's involvement in it, it must be brought to term. See? So that means, just if we stop there, artificial birth control is against the natural law because it interrupts this whole process of reproduction. And the reason why people take artificial birth control pills is precisely because they think that they have control over reproduction and not God. The reason why people get abortions is because they think, I have the right over the process of this child, whatever you want to call it, the gestation, and not God. See? So they take God out of it. Very important. If you take God out of the processes of the production of human life, you take him out of everything else about human life afterwards, because if he doesn't have a right to be conceived and to be born, etc., and to be raised, where does he get his right to life later on? From where? If it is not God. See? So then by practicing artificial birth control and permitting abortion even after 1 minute of conception, you are effectively authorizing murder. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see people murdering each other for almost nothing now. I think there was a murder the other day of somebody that was upset because he was being scammed. He shot somebody 5 times.
Road rage.
School shootings. That the idea that you have a right to life from God is gone. Your right to life is if somebody thinks you do, because of birth control and abortion, taking God out of the life processes and reproduction, etc. Then you could go on to bigger things. If you can murder somebody and if you have no respect for somebody else's life, well, what about mass murder?
The ambitions of Mao.
Yes, if you are politically incorrect. Yes, putting to death all sorts of millions of people, just as farmers will kill millions of chickens because they have a disease. So you get rid of them. You burn cows because they have hoof and mouth. Yeah, just flames. You can do that to human beings, according to that same logic. You see? And finally, genocide. If you don't like a certain group of people, then, well, why not? And this is what, in these socialist countries, don't forget that that the German Reich was National Socialism, all right? Socialism, all right? That is an atheistic political idea, and it reduces human beings precisely to animals, just like chickens or cows, that can be done away with if necessary. The socialist regime of Stalin, the low end is 20 million, the high end is 60 million, take your pick, somewhere in between. Had so many people he killed, including many Ukrainians, 10 million Ukrainians. And Mao was, I think, is 30 million, right? Something around, it was, yeah, more or less, and the Armenians put to death by the Turks, various other genocides that have taken place in the history of the world. There is no respect for the rights of God over human life. And so that whole thing is like a big chain that the logic goes through it. Either if you see life as God-given, it goes from matrimony right through to natural death. You can also justify euthanasia. Somebody is sick and there's a lot of money. They're using up a lot of money in the hospital. You give them a shot and then they're gone. You see, euthanasia, suicide. Look at all the suicide rates now. Young people killing themselves. Young people kill themselves. They have no respect even for their own life. You see that.
If I could take a slight sidebar there, see, I've always been interested in your thesis that the school shootings are in some way motivated by the anger, the suppressed and unexpressed anger of children from divorce.
Yes, most of the shooters in schools are from broken families. I think it's something like 80%. And yes, there is precisely because they have a right to be raised in a stable family, and they are deprived of that by the divorce of the parents or some sort of neglect of the parents, because the mother doesn't want to stay home and take care of the kids. She goes out and has her career. See, so they are neglected. They are angry, these children, because they do not come from stable homes. And I remember when I was 14 years old, my mother, things were a little tough in the home, and my mother said she had to go out and to work, and she said, how would you feel about, I was in high school already, how would you feel about coming home and my not being there? I said, that's okay, Mom, it's all right. But she was so conscious of of the home that I remember that, and I reassured her, don't worry about it. But that shows the difference, you see.
Well, and I think they would say these days it's a privileged background that we came from two-parent households in which the parents never divorced, and I think I'm more and more conscious of that as I run into young people who've converted to traditional Catholicism, but they come, let's say, from an atheistic background. Parents weren't married, parents were divorced, and as I talk to them and we share things and I say things and I realize sometimes that I'm saying something that I assume, well, of course my parents were together, of course my parents raised me in the Catholic faith, of course all these other things, but what an ongoing atomic disastrous event this is that just keeps going. So, okay, this divorce then leads, almost always the statistics show if you come from a broken home, you will then perpetrate a broken home. You're much more likely to get divorced if you come from a divorced family. And so all of these things that you're talking about, all, as you say, connect together, and it's so important.
Yes. Also, the psychological problems, insecurities, and children. Excuse me. That comes from a disordered home life. Just they don't. There's not proper formation. People who come from very stable homes are themselves stable, and do not have complexes and whatnot. See, so that's very important, that home life, and that's why it's important that women stay home and take care of the home, because even the physical order of the home has a big psychological effect on the children. You come home and everything is in its place, and it's clean, and that is order, you see, and that order is the interior. You see, your mind is ordered, that you expect order. And whereas if you come home and everything's a mess and the dishes are not done and you don't have any underwear and so forth, it's disorder, and that's disordering in your soul too.
Well, and part of the challenge is these people haven't been taught how to do that. So how could they? It's harder for them to engage in proper marriages because they weren't given that by their
Right.
moms.
Yes. Yes.
They maybe didn't have a mom in their household.
Right. And then the women think that it's demeaning to take care of a home. In fact, they are ordering their children. In other words, they are giving order and discipline and peace, interior peace to their children simply by taking care of the home. To make a beautiful home and just that order between husband and wife, and everything's right about it.
I think this video might be flagged for misogyny, or I can say we have to be careful here. The chain that you illustrated, I'm going to read this out because obviously our listeners won't be able to see it. We don't have a whiteboard here. But if you are a subscriber to our newsletter, which you can be if you go to our website and you are a benefactor for at least $100 in a year, you'll get this mailed to you. And in it, His Excellency takes us from matrimony to marital relations, conception of the child, development of the child in the womb, birth of the child, upbringing of the child, maturity, the child becomes an adult, and then natural death. Mm-hmm. And that, as His Excellency said, if you remove God from any of these steps, basically everything else collapses. You could even go all the way to maturity. So and then that child loses the faith. Well, you remove God from that, then everything collapses.
You take God out of human life as the author of human life, everything changes and just collapses like a house of cards. Pull them out, and the whole thing goes down.
So if we look at these first two steps, if I remove God from matrimony, then I get fornication. If I remove God from sexual relations, I get concubinage and also sodomitic marriage. If I remove God from conception, I get artificial birth control. If I remove God from the natural development of the child and the birth of the child, I get abortion. Mm-hmm. And I also get post-abortion, post-birth murder, as we've seen in some of these places where children are delivered and they're not attended to and they're allowed to die, and we call ourselves a civilized society.
The doctor has a conversation with the parents. What are we going to do? What do you think this child should survive or not? And then they just kill the child if they don't like it.
You remove God from the upbringing of a child, and you might get suicide. You might get mass murder if they engage in school shootings. You remove God from the maturity of an adult, and you may get, again, suicide or euthanasia. Mm-hmm. If this person gets to a position of power, mass murder or genocide. Mm-hmm. And if you remove God from death, you can get euthanized as well.
Yes.
If you don't see God as this is part of your cycle of things, that all things pass and that you have your time as well, that I don't want to do that, so I'm going to commit suicide, or I'll ask my relatives to...
See, if God is in it, you will live as long as God wants you to live. Even if it's 1,000 years, all right? Please no. But in other words, you cannot take your own life because it belongs to Him. That's why suicide is wrong. And so the same is true. If you take God out, well then, I'm tired of living, so I'll shoot myself.
We recently recorded a video in which we were talking about President Trump using the term "will of the people." Was this one of the things that influenced your writing about this? That if you use the frame of "will of the people," then
yes, it means he's referring to the will of the people to decide whether abortion is all right or how it should be limited, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what set me thinking about this whole thing, and that is that it's not up to the will of the people. There is a morality. There's a morality that even the founding fathers understood, that God is involved in human life, and that the law must reflect the morality. It's not just up to some people who will live and who will not live. You're going to see the concentration camps and the gas chambers with that sort of thinking. It's the genocide is the ultimate expression of that sort of thinking. The will of the people. Well, the will of the people is very, very fickle. Look at all of these, for example, anti-Jewish demonstrations going on now. I mean, is that the will of the people? It's very fickle. It can go either way. There's a morality, an objective morality, and that ultimately comes from the natural law, and more importantly, the law of God and of His church. You see, but I'm not even getting into that. I mean, that's Christ the King. That's a whole other thing. That was the religious aspect of it. I'm just keeping it down to the level of natural law.
And I think that's the challenge, Rex, is it's hard to even make the argument at the natural level. People are not willing to hear out what you're...
Even deist Thomas Jefferson figured it out, but today it's a taboo to mention that.
Do you think if we brought back deist Thomas Jefferson from the grave and we showed him this
I think he would be horrified by abortion.
which is saying a lot.
I think he would be. He would say that violates the very principles that I set down and when I wrote the Declaration of Independence. And that's saying a lot for Thomas Jefferson. He is not one of my favorite people, let's put it that way.
Yes, I know.
But at least he understood that, and that makes it all the more extreme, you might say, that even a deist of the 18th century, a non-Catholic, not even a good Protestant. The Protestants thought he was an atheist. That they understood that God has to be in this, otherwise you don't have an inalienable right. Somebody can take that right away from you. Just as you take it away from the animal when you send him to the slaughterhouse.
And we've been talking about the rights of children, and here I suppose we can close by reflecting, Your Excellency, that God has a right to be worshipped. God has a right to be enthroned in our society. God has a right to be invited into our homes,
Yes.
into our societies.
Yes. Solemn right, yes.
Well, listeners, if you, as I said, if you want to learn more about this, Father Disposito will put in the description a link to some of what His Excellency had to write in the newsletter. If you'd like to get the newsletter in full or the newsletter in advance, as our benefactors do, please feel free to click on the description. You can learn at the donate button, the link to the donate page, how you can do that. You can send a super thanks, hit like, subscribe, share this with people who you think might benefit from hearing this, who are open-minded enough to hear what a Catholic bishop has to say about the natural law and the rights of God. As always, Your Excellency, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stephen.